soft glow of the white fluorescent light bulbs that hung across the ceiling provided a cool color form around the blank, empty, and gray concrete walls of the interrogation room. Little to no sound was present, with the sole exception of some buzzing noises coming from the light bulbs. The area itself was just as empty as ever. Only a few chairs and a table were in the middle of the room. Despite being devoid of any kind of proper furniture of any sort, there was one small blue penguin by the name of Pablo, who sat in one of the chairs with a blank expression on his face. His entire body was almost covered in bandages, bruises, and an eye patch was covering one of his eyes. As he continued to sit quietly in his chair, the sound of the interrogation room door opening practically woke him up from the trance that he was in. "Good morning, Pablo," a well-dressed police officer said as he entered the room with the female detective. Pablo only nodded slightly before looking back down at the table that he was sitting next to. "Did you sleep well last night?" the female detective, a bright orange fox with blue eyes and painted pink claws, asked. "No," Pablo muttered under his breath. "I see, Pablo." The female detective grabbed a small pen and notepad out of her pocket and began jotting down notes. "Well, do you remember who I am?" the detective asked. Pablo looked back up at the detective and then back at the cop, who had bright smiles plastered on their faces. He tried to remember. However, he had only met her once before, so he had a rather hard time remembering her name. I don't think so. I'm sorry," Pablo said as he lowered his head down in shame. "It's okay, Pablo. I understand that it takes a little while to remember names. Plus, with all those bandages and things on you, I don't think remembering names is really that far up on your list as of now," the detective answered. "My name is Detective Maria, Pablo, and over there is my partner, Officer David. Now, before we start with the interview, would you like to go somewhere a little bit more comfortable? We only needed you in here so that we could run a few more tests and scans in the lab." Pablo looked up at the detective, smiling down at him, and shuffled a little bit into his seat. He certainly wasn't very comfortable being in such a dark, cold room, and the stiffness of the metal chair that he was sitting in certainly didn't help matters. So he gave a small nod in approval before being escorted by the flipper to a much larger room down the hall of the police station. As they entered into the room, Pablo saw that it was certainly better than what he had expected it to be. The room itself was painted a bright blue and pink pattern across the walls. Large pictures of various rides and cartoon characters were lined up on the wall, about 3 for each wall specifically. There were multiple toys scattered throughout the room, with a large toy chest practically overflowing with various toys and games for children of all ages. However, one thing was for sure when it came to Pablo. He was a bit too old for most of those things in the chest. And in the middle of the room, there was a sofa surrounded by 3 rocking chairs and a large wooden table in the middle of it all. Needless to say, it was a very well-made room. Definitely a lot nicer than that blank, gray, and lifeless interrogation room that he had been earlier. Detective Maria grabbed a hold of Pablo's flipper and led him to one of the rocking chairs and sat him down gently, as to not cause the already injured avian any more kind of pain than he already was in. Once they were both settled down and relaxed, the detective immediately pulled out a recorder from her pants pocket and turned it on. She then placed it towards her lips and then spoke. "May 24th, 2013. Time, 2:20 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Subject being interviewed, Pablo. Species, penguin." Pablo looked at the recorder with a hint of confusion on his face. Detective Maria immediately noticed this and said to the young blue penguin, "Oh, you don't have to worry, Pablo. This is just for our interview. That's all." "Oh, okay, but..." Pablo started up, but stopped halfway through. "What is it, sweetie?" Detective Maria asked, concerned. Well, is that going to help find the man who... Pablo's eyes began to tear up as he started to sniffle. Killed my friends? Yes, Pablo, Detective Maria said with a warm smile. It'll help us get the evidence we need to catch the person who hurt you and your friends. All I ask of you, Pablo, is to be completely honest with me and leave nothing out, okay? Pablo sniffled once again, but he was soon handed a box of tissues to wipe his eyes and blow his nose. After doing that, he smiled and nodded a yes before carefully lying back down in the rocking chair. Good, Pablo. Thank you for letting me do this, by the way. You're very brave for this, Detective Maria said. You're welcome, Pablo said, smiling back. Okay, Pablo. I want you to start from the beginning, of when all this happened, the detective said as she placed the recorder on the table and pulled out the same notepad and pen from her pants pocket. Pablo took in a deep breath, and then exhaled, and then he began to recollect his thoughts. Well, it started about a week back. Me and my friends had just finished with the final day of school, and we were getting ourselves ready for an awesome summer vacation. The sound of the school bell ringing for the final time rung throughout the halls of the elementary school like water on a beach. Normally the sound would just be yet another time to go home kind of deal. However, this time, it sounded like multiple angels singing angelic hymns at the gates of heaven. Almost immediately after the bell, every single child from kindergarten to 8th grade all let out a joyful yell of glee. Countless pieces of papers, pencils, erasers, and other school-related items flew into the air like confetti. However, in one classroom, Mrs. Park's room to be precise, the excitement for the now upcoming summer vacation could be heard all over the other students in the entire school. Now, children, you all have a wonderful summer vacation. I hope to see you all again in a few more months, Mrs. Park said as she opened up the door for the students. Almost within an instant, the entire crowd of children practically ran out the room like a stampede of water buffalo. Well, almost the entire crowd. Once the dust cloud, that is, the children, finally cleared, Mrs. Park noticed that only 2 of her students were still in the classroom, Pablo and Tyrone. They were both getting everything that the 2 of them needed and leaving everything else behind in a very neat pile. Well, Pablo, you ready to go? Tyrone said as he zipped up his backpack. You bet I am, Pablo responded back. You still coming to our camping trip tomorrow, right? Pablo asked. Of course I am, Pablo. I wouldn't miss it for the whole world, Tyrone said with a very high dose of whimsy. Awesome. Alright, now that we're all packed up, let's get out of here, Tyrone said, running towards the door. I bet I'll beat you to it, Pablo said, running after him. The 2 of them continued to run towards the door, however not before thanking Mrs. Park for everything that she had taught them. Oh, you're quite welcome, you 2. You both have a great summer vacation, Mrs. Park said as she ruffled the fur/feathers on both of their heads. With all that said and done, the 2 of them walked out of the room and into the still crowded hallways. They both desperately tried to get themselves through the crowd of screaming and laughing kids, as well as a couple of teachers too. However, any attempts to try and get themselves even remotely close to the double doors failed miserably. How are we gonna get through this crowd? Pablo said. Well, I guess we could try and... Hey guys, wait up! Tyrone was immediately interrupted with a voice calling out to them. Neither Pablo nor Tyrone could see who had called them, but they definitely recognized the voice. Guys, where are you? Another voice called out. Uniqua, is that you? Pablo called out through the sound of screaming kids and teachers. Yeah, it's me, Uniqua replied loudly. Hang on for 1 second. Not long after that, the crowd had finally started to die down to a point where everything had finally grown quiet. Both Pablo and Tyrone looked up from their spots they had been trapped in, and saw Austin and Uniqua walking over towards them. "Hey guys," Austin said as he adjusted his backpack. "Hey Austin," both Tyrone and Pablo said in unison. "So you guys ready for summer vacation?" Uniqua said in a cheerful tone. "You bet we are," Pablo said excitedly. "I see you two tried to beat the crowd," Austin said as he pointed over towards the now diminishing crowd of children getting on their respective buses. "Yeah, let me tell you, never gonna do that again," Tyrone said, wiping some sweat off of his brow. Austin chuckled a little bit. "Well, if there's one thing I know about this school is that you shouldn't try and beat the crowd. Ever. If you do, you might get crushed to death," Austin said as he walked up to Pablo and picked him up to his feet. "Thanks, Austin," Pablo said. "No problem," Austin replied back, patting Pablo on the back. Once Tyrone was back up on his feet as well, all four of the Backyardigans started making their way towards the set of double doors to get onto their bus. However, Pablo stopped dead in his tracks and looked over at the other three and asked, guys, where's Tasha at?" "Yeah, that's a good question. Where is she?" Tyrone asked. "Well, last time I saw her, she was still in class getting everything in her backpack ready," Austin said, scratching his chin. "Oh, for goodness sake, hang on, you guys, I'm coming," Tasha called out as she ran down the hall at a breakneck speed. "Hey, Tasha, glad to see that you're not going to be missing the bus today," Uniqua said. "Yeah, oh my gosh," Tasha said, trying to catch her breath. "You okay, Tasha?" Pablo asked. "Yeah, I'm good. Just need to catch my breath a little. Anyway, we're all still going to the camping trip tomorrow, right?" Tasha asked. "Well, of course we're all going," Pablo said, as he and the others made their way onto the bus. "Great, because I've already had my stuff ready for tomorrow," Tasha said in a matter-of-fact way. "Why am I not surprised?" Tyrone whispered to Uniqua, who in turn started snickering. "What's so funny?" Tasha asked in a slightly annoyed tone. "Oh, nothing," Tyrone and Uniqua said, both in unison, before practically bursting out laughing throughout the rest of the ride. "You seem to have a very close relationship with your friends, Pablo," Detective Maria said with a small smile. "Oh, you bet we're close," Pablo began. "We've all been friends since we were toddlers. In fact, our parents even went to college together back in the 80s, and honestly, we're best friends with each other. Heck, from what my mom told me, they even had their own sorority group together. I forgot what it was named, though. I think it was Kappa something Kappa. I can't really recall, though." For the first time in a few days, a smile formed under the younger penguin's beak. Not a half smile, nor a forced one, but an actual, genuine smile. Detective Maria herself felt a great sense of warmth when she saw Pablo's smile, but she knew that she had to continue with the interview as well, and that sooner or later that smile would unfortunately have to fall. "So, Pablo, how did you by any chance... did you have by any chance any feelings towards any of your friends?" Pablo blushed a little, before beginning to start fiddling with his flippers in shyness. "Well," Pablo said, still blushing. "It's okay, Pablo. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to. But you don't have to worry about any judgment or anything else either," Detective Maria said. "I do have, rather did have, a crush on Austin at one time," Pablo said softly. "Did he know about your feelings towards him?" Maria asked. "Yeah, he did. He actually felt the same way about me. He was just really, really shy to say anything about it. I guess I don't really blame him, to be honest," Pablo admitted. "I see. Now, Pablo, I'd like to ask you, could you tell me a little bit more about your friends?" "Sure," Pablo said. "Which one do you want me to talk about first?" "How about we start with Austin, and then we can work down that line," Maria said. "Oh, okay. Well, Austin, for one, is a very shy kangaroo, especially when he first met all of us a few years back, which I guess is understandable at the time since he was only 4 when we first met. Eventually he got more and more comfortable with us as the months went on, but it took some time to have him actually come out and play with us. In fact, there is even a time where he didn't come out of his house for at least a couple of weeks because he was that shy. Of course, after a year or so, he started hanging out with us a lot more. He still had his shy moments, but they were very rare. Now, another thing to know about him is that he's very, very smart. In fact, it wouldn't have surprised me if he was a genius of some sort. The first time we all met, we found out that Austin, despite being only 4 years old at the time, was already in first grade, while most of us, minus Tyrone and Tasha that is, were still in kindergarten. What grade was he in now? Maria asked. He was already in 8th grade, and he's only 8. By the end of the summer, by the end of the summer, he would have already started high school. What else did he do? Maria asked once more. Well, not only was Austin very smart, but he was also very talented too. He even made a fully functional robot that never breaks. It could even talk to you like an actual person. Despite all of his smarts, though, he was a very humble person, which also goes hand to hand with his shyness. Never once did he ever brag or shove his grades in our faces. In fact, he actually wanted to help anybody, including us, with anything regarding schoolwork. He even helped me get my math grade up to an A+, and I stink at math. The two of them giggled a bit. I was never really good at math either, Pablo, so I don't blame you, Maria said, still chuckling. Now, with all that being said, he wasn't perfect. Of course, nobody's perfect, let's be honest here. To put it bluntly, he had a lot of issues with himself. For one, he was a very depressed person. There were many days that he would be down in the dumps for whatever reason or so. He also pushed himself too far at times, almost to the point where he would literally lose sleep because of it. There are more things about it, especially with the fact that he never really liked himself that much. But I can't really recall every single thing that they were. That's perfectly fine, Pablo. So, tell me about your other friends. I'd like to know some more about them, Maria asked kindly. Well, Tasha was a bit of a brat and a snob for quite some time. Thankfully, she managed to get herself away from that bad habit, Pablo said. How is that? Maria asked. Well, one day after we were all done playing, she started to complain about something that honestly I can't even really remember because it was that stupid. Well, to make a long story short, she snapped at Austin and made him cry, and it was not very pleasant to watch. You see, when Austin cries, it's honestly one of the hardest things to look at. He's not loud about it either, he just has this face that he looks so heartbroken. Let me tell you one thing, we told her off right then and there. Thankfully she got the message, and ever since then, she's improved a lot more as a friend. And as a person, too. That's very good, Pablo. Now, are there any good qualities to your friend, Tasha? Maria asked. She's really good at fashion, that's one thing. She's also very blunt at times with the truth, and doesn't particularly sugarcoat it like most people. Sure, it hurts sometimes, but it's tough love. Not only is she blunt, but she's actually very athletic as well. She can even lift an entire 100-pound weight with just one hand. That's how good she is at it. She also knows how to deal with bullies as well. I honestly once had a bully take all my money from me, and once Tasha found out about it, she beat the crud out of that guy. She seems to be a very good friend to you, Pablo. She is. It took some time, but she definitely is a lot better, Pablo said. I'm glad she did, Pablo, Maria said, jotting down a few more notes on her paper. Now, Tyrone and Uniqua are by far the most mature out of all of us. No joke about that. While Austin is very smart and Tasha is very protective, they're both still kids. I mean, well, we all are, but still. However, Tyrone was the oldest out of all of us. He's actually 13 years old, shockingly enough. He's probably the most cool-headed person I know. He rarely gets angry, except if we're playing a role and he has to be. He also is very laid back and relaxed as well. Nothing really seems to bother him at all. However, his laid-backness can be a bit of an issue at times, especially if something's bothering us and we need someone to talk to. Now, don't get me wrong, he cares about all of us, but at the same time, he takes a bit longer to react to some things. Uniqua, on the other hand, is not only very mature, but is a very great person to talk to when things aren't really going well. She's very upbeat, happy most of the time, and honestly wants nothing else more than for all of us to be cheery and bright at every single hour of the day. Even when we're getting into fights, she still always finds a way to make everything better. You have a very wonderful set of friends, Pablo. I'm sure that you're a very good friend to them as well. Pablo giggled a little bit and gave another smile. Thanks. I needed that. I did, Pablo said happily. You're quite welcome, Pablo. Now, I need to ask you about what happened at the camping trip that you and your friends went on. Detective Maria's voice took on a more serious yet saddened tone once more. Pablo's smile that had once illuminated his face with joy and happiness now fell once again into a deep frown. Right, Pablo began. Well, the next day, after school had ended, me and my friends had everything packed and ready to go. We were planning on going to the forest pretty early to set everything up. Are you guys ready to go? Pablo said, practically hopping up and down on the floor of his house in excitement. I am, Tasha said, holding up her red and yellow backpack. Same here, Austin said, filling his water bottle up with a sports drink powder. All set, Uniqua said, putting on a pair of boots. Just gotta pack my flashlight and then I'm ready to go, Tyrone said, looking for his flashlight. Awesome, Pablo said as he opened up the front door. Quick question, Pablo. How come our parents aren't coming with us? Tyrone asked. Well, we're not going to be that far away from the houses. Plus, if we need them, we can just call them on my cell phone, Pablo said as he held up a small cell phone in his flipper. More importantly, when did you get that phone? Tyrone asked. About a month ago. Just didn't say anything because I honestly don't use it that much, Pablo responded back. Once the conversation had ended, all of the Backyardigans made their way across the street and into the forested area. About 15 minutes into the hike, Pablo saw a large clearing surrounded by trees of multiple kinds. Oak trees for climbing on, birch trees, and even an apple tree of all things. Next to said trees was a small crystal clear lake near it that reflected the beautiful sunlight of the afternoon. Hey guys, I think I found the spot, Pablo exclaimed. The others looked towards the spot and their jaws dropped at the rather magnificent view of the campsite. Wow, Pablo, this is incredible, Tasha said as she placed her bag down onto the ground. I gotta admit, it does look rather nice, Austin said as he walked towards the middle of the grassy space. Well, Pablo, I gotta admit it. You did a pretty darn good job picking out a spot for this trip, Tyrone said. I certainly agree with that. It's so beautiful here, Uniqua said. So, who's going to help me with this tent? Pablo said, pulling out a large tent cover with multiple black poles sticking out of it. So, Pablo, what did you all do during your camping trip? Detective Maria said. The usual stuff that people do during camping trips. Start a campfire, roast marshmallows, tell spooky, scary ghost stories. The usual kind of stuff, Pablo said. Pablo, may I ask, during the time that you were all playing around in the forest, did anything seem suspicious or anything like that? Maria asked with a hint of concern on her face. Pablo thought about it for a moment, scratching the part of his head that hadn't been bandaged up, which wasn't much, but still. You know, now that you mention it, I don't remember me or my friends seeing anything out of the ordinary. In fact, the most we may have seen or heard was a shadow or two, but nothing else after that. Pablo said. Well, I guess that's good, the detective said. But if you're ready, Pablo, could you talk about what happened that led to you and your friends to become, you know? Pablo took a deep breath and began to shake as the thoughts of that horrible night went through his head. Okay, Pablo began. It all started after we had all woken up the next day once we got to the forest and everything else like such. The first few golden rays of the sunshine crept through the small opening of the zipper. The rays of light landed itself onto Pablo's face as he groaned and started to awaken from his slumber. What time is it? Pablo said as he looked at the watch on his wrist. 8:45, the clock read. Pablo grunted once more and tried to sit himself up, but he found that almost impossible due to the fact that Austin was cuddled up right next to him, still asleep. The young blue avian smiled and gave the purple kangaroo a small kiss on his nose. Austin, as a reaction to the kiss, slowly opened up his eyes and saw Pablo smiling down next to him. Good morning, Pablo, Austin said. Good morning, Sleeping Beauty, Pablo said. The two embraced each other as the other students started to wake themselves up as well. Well, good morning, you two, Uniqua said, stretching her arms out. Tyrone and Tasha both got up as well, and once the good mornings were all settled and done with, everyone got themselves all cleaned up and ready for the day. Once everyone was ready, Tasha's stomach started growling. I can tell you're hungry, aren't you? Pablo said. Yep. Honestly, I think we're all a bit hungry ourselves right now, Tasha said, patting her tummy. Well, normally I'd get out some granola bars for us to eat, but since the fire is still burning, how about we have some s'mores for breakfast? Pablo said. Dude, that sounds awesome, Tyrone said. Honestly, if anything, we could really use all that sugar. Good energy and everything, Uniqua said. I'm completely fine with that, Austin said. Alright, great. I'll go get the marshmallows and the chocolate and graham crackers, Pablo said, walking down towards the back of the tent. Upon getting behind the tent area, Pablo reached over to a small cooler where the marshmallows, chocolate, and graham crackers were kept. Opening the cooler lid, Pablo went to grab the marshmallows first. However, he noticed that the bag containing the white confectionaries was completely opened up. Huh, that's weird. I thought I closed it last night, Pablo said to himself. I guess I might not have closed it all the way last night and the bag just unraveled. Pablo then grabbed the bag of marshmallows, the chocolate bars, and the graham crackers from the cooler and slid the lid shut with his foot. Alright guys, I got the stuff. How's the fire looking? Pablo yelled out. It's doing good, Pablo. I just put some more wood onto the fire, so we should be good, Tasha yelled back. Alright, thanks, Pablo called back. After making his way towards the fire, Pablo set the items down on the ground and had everyone hand them their sticks to cook the marshmallows with. One by one, Pablo placed each marshmallow on the stick and handed it to everyone to enjoy. Once the marshmallows were finished cooking, everyone crafted their breakfast s'mores together and chowed down. However, as everyone was eating, Tasha's face had a look of confusion on it as she ate her s'more. What's wrong, Tasha? You need another marshmallow? Pablo asked. No, it's not that. For some reason, this marshmallow tastes funny, Tasha said as she looked down at the chocolatey mess that was her half-eaten s'more. Really? How? Austin asked. Well, for one, it tastes a bit stale, and two, it has this really overpowering powdery taste to it, Tasha said. Well, now that you mention it, Tasha, my marshmallow does taste a bit powdery too, Tyrone said. So is mine, Austin said. Mine too, Uniqua responded. How about you, Pablo? Uniqua asked. Actually, it does taste a little odd, Pablo said. I wonder why these marshmallows taste so weird, Austin asked. Well, I guess it might have been from the marshmallows being opened all night long. Which is my fault, by the way. Sorry, Pablo said sheepishly. Oh, well, that's fine then. What's a little powder in a marshmallow anyway? It's practically covered in it anyhow, Tasha said as she devoured the rest of the s'more. The others agreed and then proceeded to finish off their s'mores one by one, every single one of them using as many marshmallows as they could. By that time, the entire bag of marshmallows had already been devoured completely. "Oh, man, I'm stuffed," Tasha said. "Yeah, that was the best breakfast I ever had," Austin said, patting on his tummy. "Yeah, that was great," Unique was said. However, her comment was interrupted by her falling to the ground, completely unconscious. "Oh my gosh, Unique, where are you?" Austin himself was also interrupted by him falling unconscious to the ground as well. Soon, everyone else was dropping like flies, Pablo himself being the final one to succumb to unconsciousness, seeing absolutely nothing but blackness. "That was the last thing I remembered before I passed out," Pablo said as he fiddled with his propeller hat. "You're doing very well, Pablo. Now a few questions. Do you believe that the marshmallows may have been tampered with?" Maria asked. "Most likely, although I don't know what it was. It was most likely a sedative of some sort, ground up into a fine powder and put into the bag of marshmallows and shaken up. It's a theory, but it's most likely what probably happened," Maria said. "Oh," Pablo responded back. "You said that you and your friends ate the whole contents of the bag, am I correct?" Maria asked. "Yes, ma'am. There really weren't that many of them left. Perhaps maybe like 10 in total," Pablo said. "Okay, it's a good thing you didn't eat too many of them. Otherwise you and your friends would have overdosed on sleeping pills," Maria said as a matter of factly. "After what happened to me and my friends, I wish that happened to us," Pablo said with a deep frown on his face. Maria frowned. She knew that this was eating Pablo up, but she knew she had to press on even more. "I know this is going to be hard for you to talk about, Pablo, but I need you to tell me everything that happened in the cabin when you and your friends were in there," Maria said. Pablo nodded his head, and then started. When I finally woke up, I couldn't see a single thing. Pitch blackness. And that was the only thing that Pablo could see. However, his hearing certainly hadn't been muffled, as he heard the sounds of groaning and small whimpers coming from all around him. He couldn't tell where he was, but he did know that he was sitting down on a chair of some sort. He tried to remove the object that was blocking his vision. However, he quickly found out that both of his slippers had been tied down by leather straps, with buckles on them, apparently, judging by the sound. After finding this out, Pablo began to panic along with all the others. He tried to speak as well, however a ball gag was tied directly around his beak to prevent him from calling out. Panic slowly began to take over the young penguin as he began to thrash about in his chair. However, this lasted for only but a minute before the sound of a door opening and then closing caused everyone in the room to fall silent. "Up already?" A deep gurgling voice called out. "Huh. I thought you all would have been asleep by the time I got back, but I guess not. Oh well. Just gives me more time to have fun," the mysterious voice said. Pablo could hear the man making his way closer towards him, judging by the sound of heavy boots hitting the floor. As the man got closer towards Pablo, the man let out a wet burp that, had not the bag been over his face, would have made the blue avian gag in response. Within an instant, the black bag that had covered the penguin's face was removed with a swift motion. Now the cabin itself wasn't really that bright, in fact it was actually very dim, but even still, it took Pablo a bit for his eyes to adjust to the sudden light. However, once it had finally cleared, he was met with the horrifying face that nearly made him wet himself. There, right in front of him, was the man. He looked to be about 6.5 feet tall. He was a very obese man, although not to the point of morbidly obesity. He was wearing a pair of black heavy combat boots and was dressed in a stained white collared shirt and black leather-looking pants. His hands, or hooves or such, were covered with black gloves for meat preparation. However, the worst of it all was the man's face. Pablo couldn't tell what kind of species the man in front of him was. He certainly wasn't a moose or a kangaroo or anything else like that. Due to the lack of fur on him, his facial features were also heavily deformed, or in this case, mutilated to some extent. His lips were chapped and crackling with dry blood caked around it. His gums were black and swollen with small pockets of pus and blood popping every time the man moved his jaw. His teeth, although very few, with most seemingly rotten to the nerve, were grotesquely crooked and sharp. His eyes were dull and empty with no form of color to speak of, and even the way his eyes were positioned on his face was definitely not normal, especially not for an average animal. The rest of his face looked almost like a rotten corpse. Even if Pablo could scream, he knew for a fact that it would only spell trouble if he even tried to. After some time, the man walked away from Pablo with a rotted, toothy grin on his face. This gave Pablo some time to examine the area more easily. The place that they were in looked like an old, dilapidated cabin. Not too big, but at the same time not too small either. The entire place smelled of death, with a heavy stench of blood in the mix of it all. The living room and kitchen were connected together. The living room area had its usual furniture and such, although mostly covered in mold and rotting away, or even at some places torn to shreds. The kitchen, however, was absolutely filthy. The sink was filled to the brim with dishes covered in rotten food, with stagnant water flowing out of the sink and landing onto the floor with small plops. The floor of the kitchen was covered in various stains of all sorts, so it was much to the point. It was honestly at that point too hard to even tell what any of them even were. 2 small light bulbs that hung in the kitchen area illuminated a small part of the area, but not a whole lot, as it was still rather dark in the cabin.
I see it's too dark in here. Let me go and turn on the rest of the lights.
The deformed pigman walked back into the door, and apparently had walked out of earlier. Within a few seconds, the entire room was illuminated with a bright light, which nearly blinded Pablo at such brightness. But like before, his eyes adjusted to the light, and what he saw made his eyes widen with fear. All of his friends were on various devices. Tasha was near another door in the kitchen, most likely a bathroom, tied down onto a table like a medieval torture device. The rack as a good example. Austin was in between both doors of the kitchen, and his hands were tied together from the ceiling and was suspended at least a few feet in the air by his arms. Plus, he was also blindfolded as well. Tyrone was sitting across from him in a chair that was very similar to the one that he was sitting in, although instead of straps, there was barbed wire wrapped tightly around his wrist and his arm. He seemed to be losing a lot of blood, as his face was practically pale and white as snow. Uniqua was tied down to the wall by the usage of various straps and wires wrapped around her hands and feet. Pablo tried to yell out for help, but of course with the ball gag in his beak, nothing would come out. Everyone's faces, with the exception of Tyrone that is, looked scared, and at the same time, very confused. The pigman walked through the door once more, carrying a toolbox in one hand and a large hunting knife in the other. What are you doing with those tools? Tasha asked, her eyes widening as the man opened up the toolbox with a few clicks.
Fun stuff,
the man said in a sick, perverted way. Tasha, in a fit of anger and rage, yelled out at the man, "You better let us go right now. I swear, If you touch me or my friend, I'll beat the living tar out of you, you hear me? My dad is a cop, and I'll have your butt arrested and thrown in jail in an instant! While she continued to yell out various calls and insults to him, the man's expression changed from sadistic glee to a hateful rage in almost an instant. The man shook and spasmed as his face contorted to one of pure hatred and wrath. The others, Pablo and Uniqua, noticed this as well and practically begged Tasha to shut her mouth, but she ignored them and continued on yelling, this time her tone getting more and more vulgar. I swear to God, if you don't let us go, you fucking perverted freak, I'll personally bash my face in your Tasha's ranting was soon interrupted with the man turning to the yellow hippo, eyes red and angry. Shut the fuck up, you annoying piece of shit! The man screamed. Almost in an instant, the man lunged at Tasha and grabbed her lower jaw with both of his greasy, gloved hands and began yanking it. Tasha screamed as the man yanked harder and harder on the younger child's jaw, pain coursing through her body as the man yanked harder and harder and harder. Soon, it had been completely unhinged from her skull, only connected by pieces of flesh and muscle. Tasha continued to scream in agony and pain as the others looked on in sheer horror. Finally, the man, with one heavy yank, tore the skin and muscle clean off the hinges of her jaw and tore the jaw straight from her skull. Tasha was now in hysterics as she attempted to scream, blood pouring out of her now missing jaw like a fountain. The screaming soon was reduced to gurgling as the blood went down her throat. Within minutes of violently shaking, coughing, and gurgling, her whole body went still, and her eyes rolled in the back of her head. She had drowned in her own blood. The man just smirked and clasped the now dislocated jawbone tightly in his now bloodied hand. Glad that little bitch was taken care of. I always hated her. The man scowled. Everyone at this point had gone silent. Not a single word was said. Pablo was in complete and utter shock at what had just happened in front of him. Tears welled up in his eyes as he stared intently at the jaw in the fat fuck's hand. This isn't happening, Pablo thought to himself. Now, where were we? The fat pig said, his perverted smile returning to his now blood-soaked face. The pigman turned his attention towards Uniqua, who in turn began to cower and cry at the wretched sight of his blood-soaked, deformed face. The man gave a rotted, toothy grin at the pink ladybug before him, before turning towards his toolbox and pulling out a spray bottle filled with the green liquid. You know, Uniqua, I never really did get what you actually were. I always thought you were an alien of some sort. But now you look more like a bug. The man's smile dropped to a frown as he held up the spray bottle towards Uniqua's face. And I hate bugs. With that, the pig began spraying the liquid onto Uniqua's face. She screamed a high-pitched scream as parts of her face began to melt off like cheese in a microwave. The man continued to spray her in the face until it was nothing else more than chunks of melted flesh and exposed skull. Despite all the trauma that she was going through, she was still breathing. The pig noticed this and tossed a bloody jaw up in the air and caught it with one hand. Then, he took the jaw and jammed it deep into her left eye socket, penetrating her brain and causing instant death. The pig looked at his handiwork and laughed a sick, maniacal laugh. Pablo at this point was trying desperately to get the gag off of his beak so that he could try and cry out for help. It was working, however, not as quickly as he wanted it to go out. The pigman, who now had already stopped laughing at this point, then walked over to the now unmoving moose Tyrone. The pigman looked closely at Tyrone and then scoffed a little.
Damn it!
I knew I had those wires tied too tightly.
Fuck!
The pig swore.
He's fucking dead anyway,
the pig said, kicking the chair with Tyrone towards the side. Although,
I still have some use for him.
Then Pigwin walked back over to the toolbox that he had brought out and pulled out a small bone saw. He then went over to where Tyrone's body was at and began sawing off Tyrone's horns, one by one. The sound of metal against bone made Pablo want to throw up. To try and get his attention away from the carnage happening right in front of him, he looked over at Austin. He didn't look any better than he did. The only difference was the amount of pain that the poor kangaroo must have been going through, having to be hung up in a position like that. He was honestly surprised that Austin hadn't started screaming in pain yet. Then again, his arms at this point must have been numb as all hell. The only good thing that Austin had compared to him was the fact that he couldn't see anything due to the blindfold. He didn't have to witness all the terrible carnage and violence that had transpired only a short while back. While thinking these things, Pablo was immediately snapped back into reality by a wet, squishy sound, followed by a small thump. He knew for an absolute fact that he didn't want to see what it was that had made that thump. However, his body wasn't listening to his mind. His head slowly turned itself towards the source of the thump, only to be met with the hornless, skinned, and severed head of his once best friend Tyrone. Pablo fought the urge to vomit because he knew that if he puked now, he'd most likely drown in his own vomit because of the gag. So he just closed his eyes and quietly wept for his now dead friend. But at least his death wasn't full of pain and misery like the other two had been. Sure, it may have been a little bit slow, but at least he died somewhat peacefully. The pig looked down at the two bloody antlers in his hands and made his way over towards his toolbox once more and got a tub of extra-strength glue and a small wooden mount. He then started putting glue on the meaty chunks of flesh that still hung from the end of the antler's base. With as much precision as possible, he placed the glue-covered antlers on the mount, one by one. Once completed, he walked over towards his door and hung the mantle on the middle of it with a nail and thread.
Now, doesn't that look nice?
The fat pig said joyfully, as he laughed a hearty yet foul laugh. Pablo lowered his head as far as it could be lowered, and attempted to try and pry the ball gag away from his beak. He was partially successful in loosening it a little, but it still needed a bit more force to break the glass completely. After his laugh, the fat pig took in a deep breath and pulled out a hunting knife from his back pocket and started walking slowly towards Austin. Pablo noticed this immediately and started to panic. In a desperate attempt to try and get rid of the gag from his beak, Pablo began closing his beak as tight as he could, which in turn made the gag slip, and after some time, the clasp finally snapped off and the gag fell to the floor with a soft thud. Quickly twisting his head around, Pablo saw that the pig was ready to jab the knife deep into Austin's neck.
No!
Pablo screamed. The pig stopped dead in his tracks as he slowly lowered the blade down to his side. He turned to the now sobbing penguin with a rather confused yet agitated look on his face. He placed the knife down on the table that had the freshly killed Tasha still on it.
Why should I?
The pig said, glaring at the penguin. Pablo only continued to sob as he tried to spit out some kind of words that would try and prevent the death of his best friend/mate. However, despite his attempts, the only thing that would come out was gargled sobs and the occasional hiccup. The pig looked at the penguin and then back at the purple kangaroo, who was also sobbing through his blindfold. This agitated him more than anything, so he marched over to Pablo and punched him straight in the eye. Pablo only whimpered as he slowly lifted his head up, to reveal his right eye had quickly swollen shut, with trickles of blood mixed with tears pouring down his face.
You better stop your fucking crying right now and answer my damn question, the pig said, gritting his rotten teeth in rage. Why shouldn't I?
He's my best friend. I love him. That was the only thing Pablo could whimper before bursting into tears once again. The fat monstrosity of a pig looked down at Pablo with a slightly surprised look on his face for a split second. Then he erupted with a deep and sadistic laugh that rang throughout the entire cabin area.
So that's why you don't want me to kill him? 'Cause he's your little boyfriend?
The pig said, spitting into Pablo's face.
I always knew you were a little sissy boy. A fucking faggot!
The pig spat once more. Pablo only shook harder and cried faster at the tone of voice the monster of an animal was using at him, but at the same time praying that this fat fuck would actually spare his best friend. The pig cocked his head a bit at Pablo and then slowly smirked.
Okay, I'll let your little boyfriend live, the pigman said.
Thank you. Thank you, please just... Pablo was cut off with another punch to his jaw.
I didn't finish, you fucking faggot,
the pig sneered.
I'll let him live, but you have to do something for me.
Pablo looked up at the pig, who now had a large, rotten, toothy grin plastered on his face for the third time. What? Pablo said, shaking in fear.
I've been in this cabin for almost 5 years now, and like everybody else in the world, I need a release, you see. I've been hungry for some fun for quite some time, and...
The pig began rubbing his fingers into Pablo's feathers on his tummy. You're gonna help me with that. Pablo didn't need to be told twice on what that sick bastard wanted to do to him. But before he could say anything, the pig wrapped the ball gag back into Pablo's beak. Then he got up and walked over towards Austin, and with the knife that he had previously had, he cut the blindfold off of Pablo's eyes. Austin blinked rapidly, not being used to the bright light, before his eyes adjusted and went wide at the carnage and gore that was surrounding him. The pig smirked and walked back to Pablo.
Now here's how it's gonna work out. You're just gonna be quiet and do exactly as I say. No questions asked. If you be a good little boy, I'll never hurt your little friend over there. I swear. Got it?
Pablo nodded, as tears and blood poured out from his bad eye, while regular tears flowed down the other. The pigman then shot a glare at Austin and said angrily,
You're gonna watch this all the way through. And if you so much as close your eyes for even a minute, I swear I'll slit his throat and have you skull fuck him. Got it?
Austin nodded as well.
Good. Now, let's begin.
He started to kiss me first, and rub his hands all over me. Pablo stopped himself. He felt like he was going to vomit. Pablo, sweetie, do you need me to get you a trash can? Maria asked, concerned. Please, Pablo said, barely able to contain himself. Maria then ran over to the water cooler where it was at and grabbed the trash can sitting next to it, and quickly ran to Pablo and placed it into his flippers. He started to puke small amounts at first, but gradually became more and more. He sobbed and screamed as the thoughts of what the pig had done to him kept flashing into his head at a rapid pace. By the end of it all, Pablo was reduced to a sobbing, broken mess. There was no way in hell he was going to want to talk about anything else more. At least not for now. Pablo, do you want me to take a... Do you want to take a break? We can if you want, Maria said, trying to comfort the small penguin. Please, Pablo whimpered. Okay, sweetie, I'll go get your mommy, alright? Maria said. She quickly grabbed the recorder and hit stop before saving the file and turning the thing off and placing it into her pocket. Once I was done, she exited the room and saw Pablo's mother, a tall woman with long blonde hair, cherry red eyes, and a blue, yellow, and red locket around her neck, standing next to the door. Her face was wet with tears, and her flipper was another propeller cap. Mrs. P, my name is Maria, the detective said as she slowly closed the door to the room. Hello there, detective. Oh, and call me Elizabeth, the tall penguin said with a sad smile. It's a pleasure to meet you, Elizabeth, Detective Maria said as she grasped the female penguin's flipper and shook it. May I go see my baby, please? Elizabeth asked with concern in her voice. Go right on ahead, Elizabeth. He's in the room I just left from, Detective Maria said, pointing towards the door. Thank you, Detective. Before I go in, though, can I ask you a few things? Elizabeth said. Of course, Maria said. First, I want to let you know that I'm very grateful for what you all are doing here. So thank you very much for this, Elizabeth said, holding back tears. You're quite welcome, Elizabeth, but you really don't need to thank us. We're just doing our jobs, Maria said. Have you managed to find out who did this to my son yet? Elizabeth asked. As of right now, no. We're still running tests and DNA from the rape kit. The very word rape kit made Elizabeth's blood run cold as fresh tears started running down her face. Her face soon contorted from a look of pure sorrow and defeat to a look of pure hatred and rage. She gritted her non-existent teeth and then said in a dark tone of voice, When you do find that sick son of a bitch that raped, tortured, and cut up my son and his friends, you bring him to me, and I'll make sure to castrate that motherfucker myself with the dullest, flattest knife in my drawer. Elizabeth, you know that we can't do that. Although personally, I'd love to see that done to that sick fuck. But as of right now, you need to go be with your son. He needs you more than anything right now, Maria said. Elizabeth's facial expressions quickly softened at the mention of her son. You're right, Detective. I'm sorry. I'm just not in the right mind right now. He's in that room, isn't he? Elizabeth said, pointing her flipper towards a door that she was next to. Yes, he is, Maria said. Thank you. And with that, Pablo's mother, with her sobbing son, and held him close like a newborn infant, crying and comforting her son in every way possible. Once the door was closed, the detective started making her way towards the forensics lab area to check and see if there were any results on the rape kit yet. Just as she was about to enter into the lab, a large gray wolf in a suit and tie opened up the door to his office and called out, Detective Maria, I need you in my office. We need to discuss a few things about the case. Yes, Captain Ezekiel, Maria said, walking towards the office door. Upon entrance into the office, Captain Ezekiel quickly closed the door and motioned for Detective Maria to sit down in one of the chairs next to his desk, which she did with no hesitation. The captain then sat down on a small rocking chair that served as the main desk chair. So, Detective Maria, how did it go? Ezekiel asked. Short answer, good. Long answer, not too well, Maria said. How was that? The captain asked. We had to take a break once I started mentioning the rape part. Captain Ezekiel's face cringed slightly at what he had just heard, although for him it wasn't surprising at all that it had happened. If anything, he was more surprised at the fact that the young penguin didn't break down in the first 5 minutes of the interview. Well, I guess a break is necessary. He would have asked for a break at one point in time or another, but still. I just can't imagine the pain that poor kid must be going through right now. He not only lost his friends, but now he has to live with the fact that he can never reproduce ever again. God, that guy's a sick fuck. Maria's eyes widened a bit with surprise and a bit of shock. Wait, what do you mean he can never reproduce? It's exactly what I said, Detective. The fucking bastard tore the kid's genitals to shreds when he was penetrated. He's not like us mammals, Maria. He's a bird. His genitals are very different compared to you and me. What the doctors told me was that because of the tearing of the cloaca, he won't be able to mate properly without severe pain. And don't get me started on the rectal tearing. Oh my fucking. Ezekiel placed a paw on his forehead and groaned. I'll never understand why the hell people like that do this kind of thing to kids. I mean, murder I can somewhat understand, although it's still bad. Beating people up, drugs, alcohol, gambling constantly, things like that. I guess you could say I can understand that. But why kids? Why fucking kids? What the hell did they ever do to those people? I don't get it. I just don't fucking get it. I'll never truly know. I never will. The room was silent for a good 5 minutes before the captain raised his head up and began to speak once more. Alright, just to let you know, the forensic team is doing their best to analyze the semen sample from Pablo's body, so you're gonna have to wait a while before the test results come in. I understand, Chief. Is there anything else that you need me to do for the time being? Yeah. I need you to go and interview Pablo once he cools down. Oh, and also get him a drink too. He's probably thirsty as hell, Ezekiel said. Yes, Captain, Maria responded back. Oh, and one more thing. Ezekiel reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He shifted through the bills and pulled out a cool $1,000 in cash. After the interview, buy the kid anything he wants from the toy store or wherever. If it goes over $1,000, I'll make sure to pay you back whatever is spent. I know this won't get rid of the kid's trauma, but damn it, I want him to at least have something to help him take his mind off the events that happened to him. Whatever he wants, you use that money to pay for it. Do you understand me? Oh, and don't worry about the semen sample analyzation or rape kit or whatever the hell it's called. I'll deal with that, Ezekiel said firmly. Yes, Captain, Maria responded back, taking the money out of her boss's paw. Good. Thank you again. You're dismissed, Ezekiel said. Maria saluted her boss and walked out of the office area and back down the hall where the room where Pablo was at. When she got there, she went over towards a soda machine and bought a lemon-lime soda for the young penguin. She then walked over towards the door and knocked on it gently while opening the door. Excuse me, I hope I'm not interrupting anything, Maria said. It's okay, Maria. Pablo's feeling much better right now, Elizabeth said, holding her son's flipper in hers. That's good. Now, Pablo, are you ready to finish the interview, or do you want to wait a little bit longer? I'm ready, Pablo said nervously. Are you sure, honey? We can stop this. We can go home if you want, Elizabeth said. No, Mom. I need to finish this, Pablo said, assured. Okay, honey. If you need me, I'll be outside of the room. Just yell if you need me. Sure thing, Mom, Pablo said, giving his mother a hug. With that, Pablo's mother left the room, leaving both Pablo and the detective back alone once again. Maria looked over at Pablo with a smile on her face and handed over the soda to Pablo. Thought you might be thirsty. It's probably good to kind of, clear your throat a little bit with something to drink. Thank you, Pablo said. As he drank, Maria took out the same voice recorder from earlier, switched it on, and then spoke into it like she had done before. May 24th, 2013. Time, 5:41 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Subject interviewed, Pablo. Species, penguin. Part 2. After saying that, she placed the recorder back down on the table in front of them. Okay, Pablo, let's get back to where we were last. However, to make it a little easier for you, I'm not going to ask you to give any details about what he did to you. I do need to at least ask you a few questions. Then after that, we can get back to where we were, okay, sweetie? Pablo nodded his head yes once again. and took in a deep breath to try and calm himself down. Okay, Pablo, did the man continue to touch you? And where did he touch you? Maria questioned. He touched me everywhere. My tummy, my mouth, my private parts, Pablo said, shaking. Where specifically on your private parts? Maria asked. Pablo lowered his flipper to his frontal crotch area and pointed there, and then to his rear end. Maria nodded, picked up the voice recorder once more, and spoke into it. Let it be known that the victim in question is pointing towards his cloaca area and rectum, respectively. After he touched me, he put his tongue in my beak and put his fingers in my cloaca, then in my bottom as well. It hurt, but it was nothing compared to what he did next. Pablo's eyes started to water as flashbacks of the pig taking his clothes off and placing the knife on his tummy flashed. He then put his thing in my body and used the knife to cut me in places, and he licked the blood off all of it with his tongue. It hurt a lot. Austin's face, when I wasn't closing my eyes in pain, was horrifying. He couldn't stop looking. This went on for almost an hour until he finally squirted out some white stuff in me and on top of me. Thank you, Pablo. Now I wish to ask, how did you escape? Pablo looked up at Maria, tears pouring down his face. He took one more deep breath and said, once he was done and he'd gotten back dressed in his clothes.
Well, Pablo, you kept your promise. You didn't scream or anything. Now you have to promise me that you won't tell a soul about what happened. Ever.
The foul pigman smirked as he looked down at the now broken and bloodied penguin before him. Pablo nodded a yes before lowering his head back into his chair. He then turned to Austin, whose eyes were now puffy and red from crying, and even his pants were soaked from the urine that he had released during the assault of his best friend. Now as for you, the fat pig said, turning towards Austin, you're coming with me to my room. Pablo's eyes widened as he made frantic noises from the ball gag in his mouth. This caught the pig's attention as he looked back over to Pablo with the same smirk glued on his face.
Now don't you worry, Pablo. I promised you that I wouldn't kill him. However, I didn't promise you that he wouldn't be of use to me. Now you just sit there and be a good boy.
The pig stormed over to Austin, who was now screaming, No, 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 please don't. No, 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 no. However, his words fell on deaf ears, as a man unlatched the chain that was holding Austin up from the ceiling and held the part that connected his hands together. Austin was kicking and screaming as the man burst open the bedroom door, which was pitch black, and walked in with Austin screaming all the way through. The screaming was cut short by the sound of the bedroom door slamming shut and locking itself from the inside. Silence. Not a single word could be heard. Pablo wept in his chair for what felt like an eternity. He inwardly blamed himself for all of this mess, and for the death of his friends. They didn't have to go camping that weekend. In fact, there had been other plans that they had already thought of doing, like going to the movies, the arcade, having sleepovers every week for the summer, and even playing in their background, going on adventures like they always did. But of course, he had to suggest going camping. Even when his friends were against it at first, he still convinced them to come along. Now here they were. 3 out of 5 of his friends were dead. Austin was most likely going to be the pig's new plaything. And worst of all, he was now responsible for a psychopath kidnapping him and his friends. Had he just not suggested eating s'mores that morning, Had he thrown them out when he saw the open bag, or better yet, had he not even thought about camping, none of this would have happened to any of them. They'd be happy, healthy, they'd grow up together. Him and Austin would have started dating and maybe even get married together. Now all of that was just a dream, all because of a stupid suggestion. Pablo continued to weep as he felt every one of his desires to slip away from him bit by bit. However, a little voice in his head, his conscience, told him otherwise. It told him to keep on fighting, to not give up, and to escape. Pablo looked down at the restraints on his flippers and noticed that one of them had snapped in half. Slowly, ever so slowly, he slipped his flipper out of the now ruined restraint. He was almost free. Without hesitation, he quickly unbuckled the other restraint and hopped off the chair, only to fall to the ground with a thud. He could barely walk after being sodomized not too long back. The pain coming from his lower half of his body was intense. He nearly screamed, but he covered his beak with his flipper. If he'd screamed now, he'd be fucked for sure. He quickly got up, ignoring the pain from his body, and walked over towards the front door and opened it. The guy was certainly an idiot, that was for sure. He had left the darn door unlocked. He breathed in the cool night air, and then ran. He ran, and ran, and ran, as fast as he could. He didn't dare look back, or even slow down for even a single moment. He just ran. After almost an hour of running, Pablo fell to the ground with a thud and passed out. That was the last thing I remembered before waking up in the hospital. I honestly had to pinch myself a few times to make sure I wasn't dead or dreaming, and thankfully I wasn't. And now, well, I'm here. Pablo soon stopped talking and wiped his eyes with a tissue. Thank you, Pablo. I think we've had enough of the interview recorded for me and the other officers to help track down that man. You were a very big help, Pablo. And most importantly, you were brave and strong for coming forward and telling us everything, Maria said, smiling. You're welcome, Detective Maria, Pablo said with a small smile. And one more thing, Pablo, Maria said with a soft yet stern voice. Yes, ma'am, Pablo said. Never, ever blame yourself for what happened back there. It isn't your fault that happened to you or your friends. You didn't know that all that was going to happen. None of you did. If anyone's to blame, it's that evil pig who hurt you and your friends. He's to blame, not you, Pablo. Okay, sweetie? Maria said. Yes, ma'am, Pablo said with another small smile. Just as Maria had finished saving the file to the recorder, she heard Pablo's stomach growl. Hungry, aren't you? Maria said. Yeah, I didn't really want to eat that much today, but now the interview is done, I guess I could eat, Pablo said, tapping his tummy. How about I take you and your mommy out to dinner? You can have whatever you want on the menu, and even have dessert too, Maria said cheerfully. Really? Pablo said. You bet. And to make it even better, how about after dinner we go to the toy store and get you some new toys, Maria said. That sounds awesome. Thank you, Maria, Pablo said happily. He would have ran up and hugged her, however, he was still pretty banged up and sore, so that really wasn't much of a possibility. Come on, Pablo, let's go get some food, Maria said, grabbing her coat and Pablo's flipper. Okay, Pablo cried out with joy. With that said and done, Pablo and the detective, as well as Pablo's mother, Elizabeth, all went out and had a grand feast at a very popular buffet restaurant in the town. Once they were done with that, everyone went to a very large toy store not too far away from the restaurant that they had eaten at. Now, despite all the money that Maria had on her, Pablo only decided to get one thing. A stuffed purple kangaroo. Nothing else. Just that. He wouldn't even look at anything else. Just a stuffed toy. It reminded him of Austin, someone who he loved, someone who he cared so deeply about. He didn't care about anything else in that store, just that plushie. It gave him comfort and it gave him warmth, just to hold on to it. Pretend that it was Austin holding him back, cuddling with him, snuggling, loving him. That was the one thing he definitely wanted. Once the purchase was made, Maria drove both Pablo and his mother Elizabeth back to their home. By the time they had come home, Pablo was already asleep, his body cuddled against a large stuffed kangaroo. Pablo's mother carried her sleeping son into the house, but before she did, she made sure to thank Maria for the wonderful night. "Thank you again for this. You really didn't have to do it." "It's not a problem," Maria said. "I can pay you back if you want. You spent quite a bit at dinner and at the toy store," Elizabeth said. Maria smiled and simply refused the offer. "It's okay. If anything, you should thank my boss. He's the one that told me to treat Pablo to a great night. But I really enjoyed bringing a smile on that little cutie's face," Maria said, rubbing Pablo's feathers gently. "Again, thank you for everything. It's no trouble. If anything seems off at any point in time, you can call me right away," Maria said. "Here's my number." She handed Maria her number and said, "Thank you." "Well, you have a good night, Detective Maria," Pablo's mother said quietly. "Good night, Elizabeth. You and Pablo will both sleep well." And with that, the detective made her way back into the car and drove off back to her home for a long and much-deserved night's rest. "Oh, hello?" Maria asked as she rolled under the side of the bed to get to her phone on the nightstand next to her.
Please help me. My baby, my baby.
The caller ID showed up to be Pablo's mother from earlier that day. The sudden screaming coming from the phone was enough to wake up the tired detective instantly. "Elizabeth, what's wrong?" Maria asked, concerned.
I went to Pablo's room to check up on him. He's gone. His window was wide open even though I made sure to lock it. Please, send help."
Quickly, she immediately got up out of her bed, called up her police department group, and grabbed her gun and badge in hand. She immediately ran up to her car and sped down the road as fast as she could, nearly hitting a few cars in the process. Within a few minutes, she was at the home of Pablo. Getting out of her car, she ran up towards the door and knocked on it with a vigorous force. Elizabeth quickly opened the door and pointed up towards the hallway upstairs. "Second door on the right," Elizabeth said through her tears. Maria quickly ran up towards Pablo's room and busted down the door. The entire room was empty and bare, the window completely wide open, and on the small blue bed was a crumpled up piece of paper. Picking it up and unraveling it, Maria's heart sank to the bottom of her feet. On the note were 3 simple words. "Playtime is over."